Hello everyone, welcome to Screen Realm. My name's Guillermo. You're about to watch an interview I was lucky enough to conduct with Bryan Fuller, an acclaimed writer, producer, creator whose many credits include Hannibal, American Gods, Star Trek Discovery, and Pushing Daisies. We chat about the new Shudder docuseries Queer for Fear, which Fuller executive produced and served as director on 2 episodes. The 4-part series examines horror and thriller genre stories from film to literature through a queer lens, and looks at them not as violent, murderous narratives, but as tales of survival that have resonated thematically with queer audiences across the world. It also features interviews with an array of talent such as Sherlock co-creator Mark Gatiss, Boys Don't Cry director Kimberly Peirce, actor Jennifer Tilly, writer-director Oz Perkins, and many more. I asked Fuller about how Queer for Fear came together and how it became his first official directing credit, what served as a surprise among the many interviews and among the many films studied, and of course I couldn't help but ask him about the fantastic series that is Hannibal, specifically if there's an update on season 4. I hope you enjoyed the interview, and please don't forget to like and subscribe. The first episode of Queer for Fear premieres exclusively on Shudder Friday 30th of September. Bryan Fuller, nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you too.
Okay, let's just get started. How did the overall concept for Queer for Fear come about, and how did you get involved personally?
Well, Queer for Fear began as an unofficial sequel to Horror Noir, which is an amazing documentary that Shudder put out a few years ago. And the producer of Horror Noir wanted to do the same thing with the queer audience. And they had set out to do a feature sequel. Horror Noir was a feature, and in its original incarnation, Queer for Fear was a feature. And then so they shot a version of that, and it felt like there was so much ground to cover that it couldn't all be squeezed effectively into a feature format. So then it became a television show, and that's sort of where I got involved, is coming aboard as essentially the showrunner for the docuseries. And it was fascinating because there was so much that I didn't even know coming into this. I didn't know Bram Stoker was queer. I didn't know that Mary Shelley was queer. I knew about the queer thematics in their works, but I didn't know the authorship was queer. And so that was very exciting to kind of forensically deconstruct a lot of our perceptions of these classic horror tales through a much more clearly defined queer lens, and just to lay a foundation of the history of horror in a way that is distinctively queer.
Right, yeah, it's a fascinating watch. I watched the first 2 episodes last night, and there's quite an array of talent, and there's quite an array of works that just the first 2 episodes alone covers. Was there any one particular work that even for you proved to be a surprising find or anything like that?
Well, there's so many that were surprising to me. I think the interview and the story that I found most endearing, honestly, was Oz Perkins relaying details of what it was like for his father to live as a closeted queer man in that era of Hollywood. And we reached out to him not to get the interview, but to essentially say, we're going to be covering, Hitchcock and the queer people that he worked with. And if you're uncomfortable with us talking about your father being queer, then we can do some clever way of putting them in a montage, not necessarily stopping and talking about it. If you're uncomfortable with us saying that your father died of AIDS, we'll find a way around it, because he's in the horror community and because both of his parents died very publicly. We wanted to be sensitive with how we were talking about his father. And he essentially said, if you're asking me for permission to tell the truth about my father, you have it. And then we started talking, and it was this, authentic, emotional, raw insight into his father's life. And I just said, would you mind coming and talking to us on camera about it?
Just in 2 episodes alone, it's quite a roller coaster. And then that whole last half of the second episode really kind of leaves you kind of stunned, really. I mean, it serves as not only fascinating film history as well, but a really kind of fascinating and ultimately tragic story about one particular person in the system at the time. And I'm a huge fan of Psycho, and I felt
Me
like,
too.
how do I barely know this?
Oh, good, good.
Yeah.
I think it's there's that's our point with a lot of this is horror fans who love these movies who are going to be discovering something new about them, hopefully. Hopefully it won't be all rote for them and they're like, yawn, I knew it.
Mhm.
But for me as a long horror fan, I found so many things that I had no idea that were really inspiring to discover, because there's something about any marginalized community, and what I love about the broadness of the queer community is that it represents so many different kinds of folks, and gay, it's very narrow
Mhm.
in its depictions of what it is to be a gay person, and queer just feels like it's much more inclusive, and looking at horror through that queer lens allows a lot more people to find relatability in these stories where they may not have realized just how intimately relatable they are.
Mhm. Absolutely. Now, when it came to gathering all the talent you've got there, you have a huge array of people that turn up. Was that easy? Was that hard? Did everyone just want to jump on board as soon as they heard about the concept? How did that go?
It's very mixed. There were people who wanted to jump on board immediately because they loved the concept. There were people who were, in these films that didn't identify sexually as queer and felt that it would be inappropriate for them to talk about queer subject matter, or like some sense of appropriation that prevented some people from participating. That was unfortunate, because it was like, no, that's the like we're all in this conversation together, and we're trying to create a salon environment
Mm.
where interesting folks are talking about interesting subject matters. But we cast a very wide net, and then there were people like Jasmine Savoy Brown, who is so wonderful in the new Scream film and amazing in Yellow Jackets. Talking to her, she was like, have you talked to this person and this person and this person and this person, because they're fantastic and they would be so great for your documentary? I was like, no, I don't know those people, I don't have access to them. And she's like, I'm going to make sure that you're in contact with all these people. So she arranged a lot of interviews just by caring about the subject matter, and we made her a producer on the project because she was so instrumental in us getting some really incredible interviews that we wouldn't have gotten without her. So it really was a town effort.
At least according to your IMDb, this is your first official directing gig. Is that correct?
Yes, yes. And I mean, I've done some directing on my shows, but never like an entire episode
Right.
or usually second unit or a rogue scene here and there. But this is as a showrunner, you're usually the director of directors. This felt like, it just like it all, none of it was sort of intended. It just sort of kind of happened because I was in the place at the time that they needed an assist, and moving from a movie to a television expression was, or an episodic television expression was, a specific type of storytelling. So it all kind of happened accidentally, and you know being most of the way through the second episode, because we did the second episode and then did the first episode, because I was piggy and I was like, I want to let's start with the psycho stuff, because like it's one
Mhm.
of my favorites, and we worked our way backwards. So it was, I became the accidental director.
Well, that's cool. I mean, you've been involved in so many amazing projects over the years that I'm surprised you haven't directed earlier. Is that like something that you were putting off a bit, or is just the way things were working out?
Well, usually in television, honestly, I'm so behind on scripts that there's no time to kind of go like, I'm going to direct an episode now. I'm
Yeah.
going to take 4 weeks out of the writers' room and rewrites to do this. So I never really had the opportunity on shows that I was show running because the rewriting process was so, you know, demanding and extensive, that this was the first time that I sort of stumbled into it. And I'll be directing a feature next year that will be, you know, that I thought was going to be my first directing title, but it turns out it's Queer for Fear.
Real quick, just because I have to, because I'm sure everyone mentions it, you know where I'm going already. I'm a huge fan of Hannibal, and I still think that it's one of the biggest TV tragedies and travesties that it was canceled. You must have been happy to see it blow up a bit when it got on Netflix.
Yeah, you know, I have to credit the Hannibal community for really sustaining the pop culture conversation with Hannibal, because I think they're, you know, part of it is the show, and the bigger, more important part of it is this audience that embraced it, saw themselves in this queer unconventional romance, and found it relatable above and beyond the story on the screen in a way that claimed it as, you know, fan fiction, which I think it is fan fiction. I think anything I do with an established IP is going to be fan fiction because I'm a fan. But really, it was about the strength and family of the Hannibal community that has kept the show alive and in the conversation. So I am and will always be very grateful to them.
So come on, season 4, let's go.
We are ready and willing to go. Like I talk to Maz Mikkelsen fairly regularly and Hugh Dancy fairly regularly, so they're both dying to come back. And it's, you know, not just about the murder husbands, it's about the murder wives. And Katie Isabel and Carlene Davarna are just as big in the story of season 4 as Hannibal and Will. So I hope we get the chance to do it. And I'm not looking at my watch, because I figure we'll pick up the story whenever we do.
Yep.
And I haven't given up hope.
That's great. Lastly, just to bring it round back, why do you think this kind of show is important for this time, Queer for Fear? There's a lot of documentary shows out there that look at genre specifically, but this particular lens gives it a bit of a unique eye. Why do you think fans of horror and maybe of cinema in general will enjoy this?
Well, I think queer fans of horror will enjoy it because it gives them a greater context for the thing that they've been enjoying their entire lives, and perhaps haven't thought about all the ways why they're enjoying it. And that's exciting. And I think for straight audiences who are cinephiles or queer allies will see it and discover a greater relatability to queerness than perhaps they thought they had before, because it was, you know, contained within the restrictions of sexual identity. But queerness in many ways is ideological. So I think I'm hoping that a lot of straight people find themselves relating deeply to the queer thematics, and also find a greater appreciation and acceptance of the queer community.
Well, thank you so much for your time today, and all the best on that next big project you got coming up.
Thank you so much, Guillermo. We'll talk to you soon.